The wind howled across the dusty plains of Sweetwater, Texas, carrying whispers of change as Rose Vandermeer stepped off the stagecoach that spring day in 1875. Her emerald eyes scanned the frontier town with a mixture of apprehension and determination, clutching her worn leather satchel against the fine fabric of her traveling dress. She had left everything behind in Boston: a comfortable life, disappointed parents, and a fiancé whose betrayal still burned in her chest like a hot coal. Violet Zimmerman had arrived in Sweetwater with nothing but a teaching certificate and dreams bigger than the Texas sky. 4 years later, she had established herself as the town's schoolteacher, earning respect despite the initial skepticism that had greeted her. Today, she waited for the stagecoach with a handful of other townspeople, eager to welcome the new seamstress who'd answered the advertisement placed by Mayor Collins. The stagecoach's arrival kicked up a cloud of dust that settled on Violet's pale blue dress, but she paid it no mind. Her attention fixed on the young woman who descended with remarkable grace despite the coach's sudden jolt. "Miss Zimmerman." The newcomer approached with an outstretched hand. "I'm Rose Vandermeer. Mayor Collins said you might help me get situated." Violet smiled warmly. "Indeed I will." "Welcome to Sweetwater. I've arranged temporary lodging for you above Mrs. Peterson's general store until you find something more permanent." As they walked down the main street, Violet pointed out the essential landmarks of the small but growing town: the sheriff's office, the saloon that decent women avoided, the church where social gatherings happened as frequently as Sunday services, and finally, the empty storefront that would soon become Rose's dress shop. "It's not much now," Violet admitted as they stood before the dusty windows, "but with your skills, I'm certain it will transform quickly." Rose pressed her palm against the glass, her imagination already filling the space with bolts of fabric, a sewing machine, and customers eager for fashion that reminded them they were women, not just frontier survivors. "It's perfect," she whispered. From the corner of the saloon across the street, Ryker Thompson watched the two women with mild curiosity as he rolled a cigarette. At 32, he'd spent more than half his life on horseback, driving cattle across dangerous territory. The scars on his weathered hands told stories of rope burns and knife fights, while the lines at the corners of his eyes spoke of squinting against harsh sun and dust storms. Unlike most cowboys who drifted through, Ryker had recently put down tentative roots in Sweetwater. His uncle's death had left him a modest ranch just outside town, and after years of wandering, the idea of something permanent had begun to appeal to him. Still, he kept mostly to himself, wary of entanglements both personal and professional. "New gal in town?" asked Mac, the livery stable owner, as he joined Ryker in his observation. "Seems so." Ryker lit his cigarette, the match flaring briefly in the late afternoon light. "Heard she's opening a dress shop. Imagine that, fancy dresses in Sweetwater." Mac chuckled. "The women are already buzzing about it." Ryker merely nodded, his gaze lingering on the taller woman with auburn hair that caught the sunlight like burnished copper. There was something in her posture, a determined straightness to her spine, despite obvious exhaustion that spoke of someone who wouldn't be broken easily by frontier hardships. "Well," he finally said, flicking ash to the dirt, "let's hope she doesn't waste her time making frippery nobody here can afford." 3 weeks passed in a flurry of activity as Rose established her shop. The women of Sweetwater had proven more receptive than she'd expected, bringing in mending and alteration work while eyeing the fashion plates from back east that Rose had carefully mounted on the walls. Violet had become a fast friend, stopping by the shop almost daily, ostensibly to check on Rose's adjustment to town life, but increasingly drawn by their shared conversations about books, ideas, and the lives they'd left behind. "You never speak of Boston," Violet noted one evening as they shared tea in Rose's small living quarters above the shop. "Was it terribly difficult to leave?" Rose's fingers tightened around her teacup. Not as difficult as staying would have been, she answered carefully. My parents had arranged a marriage that would have benefited everyone except me. Oh, Violet nodded in understanding. Many women came west fleeing such arrangements. And the gentleman? Charles Winfield was no gentleman, Rose replied, her voice hardening slightly. I discovered him with my cousin the week before our wedding. When confronted, he laughed it off as a momentary indiscretion and suggested I would need to develop a more forgiving nature as his wife. Violet reached across the table and squeezed Rose's hand. Then Sweetwater is fortunate to have gained such a talented seamstress at Mr. Winfield's expense. Rose smiled gratefully. Enough about my disappointing past. Tell me more about this town gathering happening tomorrow. Will everyone attend? Nearly everyone, Violet confirmed. It's to celebrate the new schoolhouse. There'll be food, music, perhaps even dancing if Pastor Williams doesn't object too strenuously. Then I should finish my new dress, Rose decided, her spirits lifting at the prospect of a social event. Nothing too elaborate, of course, but something that might show the ladies what's possible. The next day dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the outdoor celebration. Rose spent the morning putting the finishing touches on her creation, a modest but stylish dress in a soft green fabric that complemented her eyes, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs that had taken hours of painstaking work by lamplight. By mid-afternoon, the area around the new schoolhouse buzzed with activity. Tables laden with food stretched beneath shade trees. Children ran laughing through the crowds, and a group of musicians tuned their instruments on a makeshift platform. Rose arrived with Violet, immediately drawing appreciative glances from the women and curious looks from the men, most of whom rarely saw a dress that hadn't been mended multiple times or remade from older garments. You'll have orders until Christmas after today, Violet predicted with a smile. They mingled easily, Rose meeting more townspeople in those first hours than in all her previous weeks combined. She was introduced to the mayor and his wife, the doctor and his family, and various merchants who welcomed her contribution to the town's growing economy. It wasn't until the music began in earnest that she noticed him, a tall figure standing somewhat apart from the festivities, his stance suggesting he might leave at any moment. Unlike the other men who donned their Sunday best, he wore practical clothes, dark trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a well-worn leather vest. His hat was pulled low, shadowing features that nonetheless struck her as uncommonly handsome beneath several days' worth of stubble. "Who is that?" she asked Violet quietly as they sampled Mrs. Sullivan's apple pie. Violet followed her gaze. "Ryker Thompson. He owns the small ranch north of town. Keeps to himself mostly, though he's been known to help when there's trouble. His uncle was well respected here. He doesn't seem to be enjoying himself," Rose observed. "Ryker isn't one for gatherings," Violet explained. "Sheriff Davis probably asked him to come. They served together during the war, I believe." Before Rose could inquire further, a commotion erupted near the refreshment table. 3 young cowboys, clearly already deep in their cups despite the early hour, had arrived uninvited from a nearby ranch. "Well, ain't this a fine party?" the tallest one declared loudly, helping himself to a generous serving of punch that he promptly enhanced with a flask from his pocket. Didn't know Sweetwater had gotten so fancy. Sheriff Davis approached them with a deceptively casual stride. "Afternoon, boys. Don't recall seeing your boss around. He know you're in town." "Old man Fisher don't keep us on leashes," replied another of the trio, a wiry youth with a patchy attempt at a beard. "We got paid yesterday and figured we'd see what entertainment Sweetwater might offer." "Then I suggest you head over to the saloon," the sheriff said firmly. "This here's a family celebration." For a moment it seemed they might argue, but the tallest one shrugged after scanning the crowd. "Might be right, Sheriff. Saloon likely has prettier company anyway." They turned to leave. But as they passed near Rose and Violet, the third cowboy, red-faced and unsteady, stumbled against Rose, knocking her backward. She would have fallen if Violet hadn't caught her arm, but the damage was done. Rose's punch had spilled down her front, and as she stepped away from the clumsy cowboy, her dress caught on an exposed nail from the rough-hewn table. The distinctive sound of tearing fabric cut through the momentary silence. Rose froze as she felt the back of her carefully crafted dress rip from waist to hem, exposing her petticoat to the gathered crowd. The three cowboys erupted in raucous laughter. "Looks like the fancy new dressmaker can't even keep herself decent," hooted the tall one, pointing rudely. Others in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, several women moving instinctively toward Rose, but before they could reach her, Ryker Thompson appeared as if materialized from the dust itself. Without a word, he shrugged out of his long brown duster and wrapped it gently around Rose's shoulders, covering the tear and her embarrassment in one fluid motion. "Time for you boys to leave," he said quietly to the cowboys, but something in his level gaze silenced their laughter immediately. "We were just having fun," muttered the wiry one, no longer looking quite so amused. "Find it elsewhere," Ryker suggested, his hand resting casually near the holster at his hip. The sheriff stepped closer. "I believe I already gave you that advice. Don't make me enforce it." The three cowboys retreated, muttering but subdued. Rose stood perfectly still, clutching the edges of Ryker's coat around her, mortification washing over her in waves. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible. Ryker tipped his hat slightly. "Madam." His eyes, a startling shade of blue in his tanned face, met hers briefly before he turned to the sheriff. "Dave, I'll see these fools clear of town." "Appreciate it, Ryker," Sheriff Davis nodded. As Ryker followed after the departing troublemakers, Rose felt a strange mix of emotions: humiliation at the public spectacle, gratitude for his swift intervention, and an unexpected flutter of interest that she immediately tried to suppress. "Are you all right?" Violet asked, guiding Rose toward the schoolhouse. "We can slip inside and see what might be done about your dress." "I'm fine," Rose assured her, though her cheeks still burned with embarrassment. "It's just fabric, it can be mended." Several women gathered around them, offering sympathetic words and practical solutions. Mrs. Peterson had a needle and thread in her reticule. The mayor's wife suggested a shawl might serve until Rose could return home. Their kindness helped soothe the sting of humiliation, reminding Rose that she had indeed found a community here. Inside the schoolhouse, with Violet's help, Rose removed the coat to assess the damage. The tear was substantial but clean, a simple enough repair, though not one that could be managed on the spot. "I should go home and change," Rose decided, folding Ryker's coat carefully over her arm, "and find Mr. Thompson to return this." "I'll walk with you," Violet offered. "No, please stay and enjoy the celebration. I've caused enough disruption." Rose managed a smile. "I'll change quickly and return. This dress may be ruined, but I have others." Despite protests, Rose insisted on making her way back to town alone, the coat draped around her shoulders. The walk gave her time to collect herself, to remember that she had faced far worse embarrassment in Boston and survived. By the time she reached her shop, her practical nature had reasserted itself. She changed into a simpler dress, one of the first she'd made after arriving in Sweetwater, and carefully hung Ryker's coat on a hook by the door. She would find him later to express her gratitude properly. For now, she had a celebration to return to, and she refused to let three drunken cowboys deprive her of that pleasure. When Rose returned to the gathering, she held her head high, smiling and joining conversations as if nothing had happened. Several women complimented her resilience, and more than one ordered new dresses, perhaps inspired by her determination as much as by her evident skill. She didn't see Ryker again that afternoon, though she found herself scanning the crowd periodically, his coat now carefully folded and placed in her basket. As the celebration wound down and people began dispersing in the fading light, Rose approached Sheriff Davis. "Sheriff, I was hoping to return Mr. Thompson's coat. Do you know where I might find him?" The sheriff scratched his graying beard. "Most likely headed back to his ranch by now. It's about 3 miles north, just past the creek crossing. Can't miss it, got a big oak tree right by the gate. Though if you want, I could return it when I see him next." "That's very kind, but I'd prefer to thank him personally," Rose said. "Perhaps I could ride out tomorrow." The sheriff looked doubtful. "It's not really proper for a lady to—" "I'll accompany her," Violet interjected, appearing at Rose's side. "I've been meaning to ask Mr. Thompson about providing some books for one of my students who's laid up with a broken leg. His ranch hand's boy," she added by way of explanation. Sheriff Davis seemed relieved. "Well, that sounds more suitable. Morning would be best, he tends to work the far pastures afternoon." The next morning dawned with a hint of clouds on the horizon, but the air remained clear and warm as Rose and Violet set out in a borrowed buckboard from the livery. Rose had debated what to wear, finally settling on a practical riding skirt and jacket in a deep burgundy that she'd completed shortly after her arrival. "You seem nervous," Violet observed as they crossed the creek that marked the boundary of Ryker's property. "Do I?" Rose adjusted her grip on the reins. "I suppose I'm simply concerned about imposing. Sheriff Davis indicated Mr. Thompson values his privacy." Violet smiled knowingly. "He's quite handsome in a rugged way, isn't he? I've noticed several of the eligible ladies in town casting glances his direction whenever he comes in for supplies." "I hadn't particularly noticed," Rose lied, focusing intently on the road ahead. "I simply wish to return his coat and express my thanks for his kindness yesterday." "Of course," Violet agreed, her tone making it clear she didn't believe a word of it. The Thompson ranch came into view as they rounded a bend, a modest homestead with a well-maintained main house, a barn, and several outbuildings. True to the sheriff's description, a massive oak dominated the yard, its sprawling branches providing shade for a wooden bench and water trough. As they approached, a dog began barking, alerting the household to visitors. Moments later, Ryker emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He froze momentarily upon recognizing the women, then walked toward the buckboard as they pulled to a stop. "Miss Zimmerman," he nodded to Violet, then turned to Rose. "Miss Vandermeer," Rose supplied, suddenly feeling flustered under his direct gaze. "Rose Vandermeer. I've come to return your coat, Mr. Thompson, and to thank you properly for your assistance yesterday." He stepped closer to help her down from the buckboard, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Rose felt a curious warmth spread through her at the brief contact. "No thanks necessary," he said, releasing her quickly and offering the same assistance to Violet. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't," Rose pointed out, retrieving his coat from the back of the buckboard. "You did, and I'm grateful." Ryker accepted the folded garment with a nod. "You ladies come a long way just for that. Least I can do is offer you some coffee before you head back." His invitation surprised them both, but they accepted readily. The interior of Ryker's home proved as practical and unadorned as the man himself, clean and well-ordered, but with few personal touches beyond a bookshelf, filled with surprisingly varied titles, and a framed tintype of a couple Rose assumed were his parents. As he prepared coffee with efficient movements, Violet explained about the books for his ranch hand son, producing a small list of titles the boy might enjoy during his recovery. "Tommy's a bright kid," Ryker said, placing mugs before them. "Been teaching himself despite limited schooling. His father Hank's been with me since I inherited the place, good man." "That's very commendable of you to encourage the boy's education," Rose remarked, sipping the surprisingly excellent coffee. Ryker shrugged. "Man ought to know more than just cattle and horses if he's to make his way in this changing world." The conversation flowed more easily than Rose had expected, revealing glimpses of a thoughtful mind behind Ryker's taciturn exterior. He'd traveled extensively during his years as a drover, read voraciously during long nights on the trail, and developed opinions on everything from territorial politics to the future of ranching in the region. When Violet mentioned her need to visit the ranch hand's family before they returned to town, Ryker offered to show Rose the property while they waited. "Not much to see compared to what you're used to back east," he said as they walked toward the corral where several horses grazed. "But it suits me." "How did you know I'm from the east?" Rose asked, surprised. A slight smile creased his weathered face. "Your accent hasn't completely faded. Boston, if I had to guess. You have a good ear." "Spent time around all sorts of people on the trails," he explained. "You learn to place folks by their talk, their habits." "And what have my habits told you about me, Mr. Thompson?" Rose found herself asking boldly. He studied her for a moment. "That you're determined, independent, and running from something or someone." Rose felt her breath catch. "That's rather presumptuous. Most people don't leave comfortable lives in civilized places without reason," he said simply. "Especially women with education and refinement." They reached the corral fence, and Rose rested her gloved hands on the weathered wood, gathering her thoughts. "You're not entirely wrong," she admitted finally. "Though I prefer to think I was running toward something rather than away, a chance to build something that belongs entirely to me." Ryker leaned against the fence beside her, his forearm nearly touching hers. "And have you found it?" "What you were looking for?" Rose considered the question seriously. "I believe I'm finding pieces of it. The shop, independence, a community that values what I can contribute." She turned to look at him directly. "What about you, Mr. Thompson? What made a drover decide to put down roots?" His expression shifted subtly, eyes narrowing slightly as if assessing whether to share something personal. "Spent 15 years moving other people's cattle across dangerous country," he finally said. "Watched good men die from accidents, whether rustlers. Realized one day I was 30 years old with nothing to show for it but scars and stories. And when your uncle left you this place, seemed like a sign, maybe, a chance to build something that might last longer than I do." He straightened from the fence. "Not that I've gone completely respectable. Still break my own horses, still sleep under the stars when working the far pastures." Rose smiled. "I wouldn't have imagined you completely tamed by property ownership, Mr. Thompson." "Ryker," he corrected, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "If we're discussing my lack of civilization, you might as well use my name." "Then I'm Rose," she replied, feeling a curious flutter in her stomach at this small intimacy. They walked further, Ryker pointing out improvements he'd made to the property and plans for expansion. Rose found herself genuinely interested, asking questions about ranching that revealed her ignorance but also her quick intelligence. "You've done remarkable work here in just a year," she observed as they circled back toward the house. "You must be proud." "Getting there," he allowed. "Still much to do before winter." They found Violet waiting by the buckboard, having concluded her visit with the ranch hand's family. As they prepared to depart, Ryker handed Rose a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Some herbs from my garden," he explained. "Good for tea, especially when the weather turns." Rose accepted the unexpected gift with surprise. "Thank you, that's very thoughtful." "Least I could do for someone who took the trouble to return a dusty old coat," he replied, his expression unreadable. As they drove away, Rose found herself looking back at the solitary figure standing by the oak tree, his hand raised briefly in farewell. "Well," Violet said after they'd traveled some distance in silence. "He was certainly more conversational than I've ever seen him in town." Rose smoothed her skirt, trying to appear casual. "I found him quite reasonable, intelligent even, Violet hummed knowingly. "And the herbs? Does he give garden gifts to everyone who visits, I wonder?" Rose felt her cheeks warming. "Don't be ridiculous, it was simply a courteous gesture." "Of course," Violet agreed with a smile that suggested she thought it was anything, but over the following weeks, Rose found herself unusually busy as word of her dressmaking skills spread beyond Sweetwater to neighboring settlements. Orders for wedding dresses, special occasion garments, and even everyday wear that incorporated small touches of beauty kept her working long hours. She might have forgotten about Ryker Thompson entirely had he not appeared in town with increasing frequency. He never sought her out directly, but somehow their paths crossed with surprising regularity at the general store, outside the post office, near the church after Sunday services. Each time, their exchanges were brief but cordial, with Ryker inquiring about her business and Rose asking after his ranch. Violet observed these interactions with barely concealed amusement, particularly when Rose began taking extra care with her appearance on the days when supplies typically brought ranchers to town. "You're being childish," Rose chided when her friend pointed out this pattern. "I simply believe in maintaining professional standards." "Of course," Violet agreed, straightening a display of ribbons in Rose's shop. "It couldn't possibly have anything to do with a certain rancher who's been finding remarkably frequent reasons to come to town lately." Before Rose could formulate a suitably dignified denial, the bell above her shop door jingled. Both women turned, expecting a customer, only to find Ryker himself filling the doorway, looking somewhat out of place among the bolts of fabric and feminine accoutrements. "Mr. Thompson," Rose greeted him, suddenly conscious of a loose strand of hair that had escaped her normally tidy arrangement. "This is an unexpected pleasure." He removed his hat, revealing hair that had recently been trimmed. "Miss Vandermeer, Miss Zimmerman, hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Violet replied brightly. "In fact, I was just leaving, parish committee meeting." She gathered her reticule with suspicious haste. "Rose, I'll see you tomorrow for tea." Before Rose could protest, Violet had slipped past Ryker with a knowing smile, leaving them alone in the shop. "Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Thompson?" Rose asked, moving behind the counter where she felt more composed. "Perhaps a gift for someone." Ryker turned his hat in his hands, an uncharacteristic sign of hesitation. "Actually, I came to invite you to dinner, tomorrow evening." "At my ranch." The words came out more abruptly than he'd likely intended. Rose blinked in surprise. "Dinner? Yes." He cleared his throat. "Nothing formal, just thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal, what with all the hours you've been keeping here lately." "You've noticed my hours?" she asked, unable to keep a small smile from forming. "Lamp burns late in your window most nights," he acknowledged. "Figured you might welcome a reason to step away from work." The invitation was unexpected but not unwelcome. Still, propriety demanded certain considerations. "It's very kind of you to think of me," Rose said carefully, "though I'm not sure it would be entirely proper for me to dine alone with you at your ranch." Ryker nodded, unsurprised by her hesitation. "Already thought of that. Hank's wife Mary would join us. She's been wanting to meet you anyway, keeps talking about a new dress for their daughter's 16th birthday come fall." Rose felt both relieved and oddly disappointed at this clarification. "In that case, I'd be delighted to accept. What time should I arrive?" "I'll collect you at 5 if that suits." His expression remained largely impassive, but Rose thought she detected a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Best to drive out before dark." 5 would be perfect, she confirmed. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "Mary's handling the food." After he'd left, Rose stood motionless for several minutes, trying to understand her own reaction to this simple dinner invitation. There was nothing remarkable about it, a neighborly gesture, perhaps with the added motivation of securing her services for his employee's family. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation that had taken up residence beneath her ribs, nor the immediate mental inventory of her wardrobe that followed. What would be appropriate for such an occasion? Nothing too elaborate that would suggest expectations beyond a friendly meal. But not too plain either. Rose laughed at herself suddenly, realizing she was behaving exactly as Violet had suggested, like a schoolgirl with her first admirer. She was a grown woman of 24 who had left behind a comfortable life to forge her own path. Surely she could manage a simple dinner without excessive fretting over appearances. Nevertheless, the next day found her closing the shop early to prepare herself with more than usual care. She selected a dress of deep blue that she'd made shortly before leaving Boston, simple in design, but flattering to her figure and coloring. She arranged her hair in a style that appeared effortless but required considerable effort to achieve, and added her mother's pearl earrings, one of the few pieces of jewelry she'd brought west. When Ryker arrived precisely at 5, driving a well-maintained buggy rather than the usual buckboard, Rose was waiting, a light shawl draped over her arm against the evening chill that often followed hot days. "You look nice," Ryker said as he handed her up into the buggy, the compliment offered with a straightforwardness that somehow made it more meaningful than more flowery praise might have been. "Thank you," she replied, settling her skirts. "So do you." It was true he'd clearly made an effort, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his boots polished, his usually unruly hair tamed somewhat. The drive to the ranch passed pleasantly, with Ryker pointing out changes in the landscape since her last visit and asking thoughtful questions about her business. Rose found herself speaking more freely than she typically did about her hopes for expanding the shop, perhaps eventually training an apprentice. "Town's growing," Ryker observed. "Railroad survey team was through last month. If they decide to put a spur line here, you'll have more business than you can handle." "Do you think that likely?" Rose asked, intrigued by the possibility. "Cattle shipping's moving south," he said with a shrug. "Makes sense they'd want a line through here eventually. Could change everything." "For better or worse?" she prompted, sensing deeper thoughts behind his brief statement. He considered this seriously. "Both, I expect. More opportunities, more people, also more complications, more competition." He glanced at her. "Change isn't always bad, though. Sometimes it brings unexpected good things." Something in his tone made Rose wonder if he was referring to more than just the railroad, but before she could pursue the thought, they arrived at the ranch. The house looked different from her previous visit. Lanterns hung from the porch eaves, and flowers she hadn't noticed before brightened window boxes. Mary, Hank's wife, proved to be a robust woman in her 40s with a welcoming smile and no-nonsense manner. She greeted Rose warmly, immediately engaging her in conversation about her dress shop while simultaneously directing Ryker to assist with final dinner preparations. "He's a fair hand in the kitchen," Mary confided as Ryker disappeared with a bowl of potatoes. "Better than most bachelors. Makes a stew that'll strengthen your bones for winter." The meal itself was simple but expertly prepared: roast beef, vegetables from the garden, freshly baked bread, and a berry cobbler that Mary proudly announced contained fruits picked by her recovering son that morning. Conversation flowed easily, with Mary asking questions about Boston and fashion trends that Rose was happy to discuss. Ryker spoke less but listened intently, occasionally offering observations that revealed his own experiences in various cities during his traveling years. After dinner, when Mary insisted on clearing up alone, "You're a guest, Miss Vandermeer, and I won't hear otherwise," Ryker suggested a short walk to aid digestion. The evening had cooled pleasantly, and a nearly full moon illuminated the yard and surrounding pastures with silver light. "Thank you for inviting me," Rose said as they strolled toward the massive oak tree. "It was a lovely evening." "Glad you came," he replied. "Mary's been wanting company. Gets lonely out here sometimes." "Only Mary?" Rose asked before she could reconsider the boldness of the question. Ryker halted beneath the tree, its branches casting dappled shadows across his features. "No," he admitted after a moment. "Not only Mary." A silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and the gentle sounds of a spring evening, distant cattle lowing, night birds calling, the whisper of breeze through oak leaves. "Why did you really invite me here tonight, Ryker?" Rose finally asked, abandoning formality. He studied her face in the moonlight. "Because I wanted to know you better," he said simply. "Beyond brief conversations in town and polite nods at church, and do you know me better now, beginning to?" He took a step closer. "Know you're brave, independent. Skilled with your hands and sharp with your mind." Another step. Know you laugh with real joy when something amuses you, not the practiced titter I've heard from some town ladies. Rose felt her breath quicken at his proximity and the unexpected eloquence of his observations. You've been watching me closely. Yes, he acknowledged without apology. Have been since you stepped down from that stagecoach looking like you were ready to conquer the frontier single-handedly. I wasn't aware you'd notice me then, she said softly. Noticed you, he confirmed. Thought you'd probably turn tail and run back east within a month. Rose couldn't help but laugh. That's not very flattering. Wasn't meant to be. Was impressed when you proved me wrong. His hand moved tentatively toward hers, pausing just shy of contact. Most impressed when you walked back into that gathering yesterday with your head high after those fools embarrassed you. Takes courage to face down humiliation like that. Rose felt warmth spreading through her at his words and the nearness of his hand to hers. I've had practice, she admitted. Boston society can be crueler than any frontier town. Their loss, he said simply, finally taking her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, the hand of a man who worked with rope and leather, who built fences and broke horses. Yet his touch was gentle as his fingers laced with hers, the contact sending an unexpected thrill up her arm. I should be getting back to town, Rose said reluctantly, though she made no move to withdraw her hand. Yes, he agreed, equally motionless. Then, with a decisive movement, he lifted her hand and pressed a brief, warm kiss to her knuckles before releasing her. I'll bring the buggy around. The ride back to Sweetwater passed in a comfortable silence punctuated by occasional observations about the stars or the silhouettes of distant mesas against the night sky. When they reached her shop, Ryker helped her down, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. Thank you again for a lovely evening, Rose said, standing on the boardwalk outside her door. My pleasure, he replied, still holding his hat in his hands rather than replacing it. Perhaps you might consider another invitation sometime. I would, she answered honestly. Very much. He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Good night then, Rose. Good night, Ryker. As she prepared for bed that night, Rose found herself replaying the evening in her mind, the conversations, the companionable silence, the feel of his hand holding hers beneath the oak tree. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to consider a man's attention as anything other than potentially threatening to her hard-won independence. Yet something about Ryker Thompson felt different. There was a steadiness to him, a lack of pretense that made her feel secure rather than endangered. And the way he'd spoken of her courage and determination suggested he valued precisely the qualities that Charles and Boston society had found problematic in her. Over the following weeks, Ryker's invitations continued rides across his property, picnic lunches by the creek, occasional dinners with various ranch employees, and their families present as propriety demanded. Each encounter revealed more layers to the man behind the taciturn exterior, his dry humor, his extensive reading despite limited formal education, his genuine concern for the welfare of his workers and their families. Rose found herself looking forward to these meetings with an eagerness that both excited and frightened her. She had come west to establish independence, not to form attachments that might compromise it. Yet she couldn't deny the growing connection between them, nor did she particularly want to. Violet, naturally, noticed the developing relationship with undisguised delight. He actually smiled in church yesterday, she remarked one afternoon as she helped Rose organize a new shipment of fabrics. A full smile, not just that slight upward movement of his lips that passes for acknowledgement with most people. And it happened precisely when you entered the building. Coincidence, Rose murmured, though she had noticed the smile herself and treasured it privately. Of course, Violet agreed with knowing exaggeration. Just as it's coincidence that Mrs. Peterson's oldest boy delivered a bouquet of wildflowers to your door last week with no card. Rose felt her cheeks warm. Those could have been from anyone. Indeed they could, Violet conceded. though interesting that they contained Indian paintbrush that grows primarily on the north ridge of Ryker's property. "You're becoming quite the botanical expert," Rose observed dryly. Violet laughed. "I'm merely observant. And what I observe is that Sweetwater's most confirmed bachelor appears to be courting its newest businesswoman with considerable determination." Before Rose could formulate a suitable retort, the shop door opened to admit Mrs. Collins, the mayor's wife, accompanied by her daughter Eleanor and Eleanor's friend Sarah Jenkins, whose father owned the bank. "Miss Vandermeer," Mrs. Collins greeted her warmly. "I hope we're not interrupting." "Eleanor has wonderful news. She's engaged to be married to William Preston from Fort Worth. We'll need a wedding dress of the finest quality and naturally thought of you immediately." The next hour was consumed with discussions of styles, fabrics, and timelines, with Eleanor vacillating between modesty and extravagance, while her mother clearly leaned toward the latter. Rose maintained her professional demeanor throughout, making helpful suggestions and sketching possible designs, though part of her mind remained occupied with Violet's observations. When the Collins party finally departed, having arranged for Eleanor's first fitting the following week, Violet resumed their conversation as if there had been no interruption. "The town is beginning to talk, you know," she said, her tone gentle despite the potentially alarming statement. "Nothing malicious. Most people are pleased to see Ryker taking an interest in someone, but you might want to consider what your intentions are before speculation runs wild." Rose sank onto a stool behind her workbench, suddenly tired. "My intentions? I hardly know myself. I came here to establish independence, to build something of my own. I wasn't looking for complications." "Is that what he is? A complication?" Violet asked perceptively. "Potentially," Rose admitted. "I left Boston partly to escape a man who saw me as an accessory to his ambitions rather than a person with dreams of my own. I'm wary of allowing anyone similar influence over my life again." Violet considered this thoughtfully. "Has Ryker given you any reason to believe he views you that way?" "No," Rose conceded after a moment's reflection. "If anything, he seems to value my independence." "Then perhaps he needn't be seen as a threat to your plans, but as a potential partner in them," Violet suggested. The word partner lingered in Rose's mind long after Violet had left. It wasn't a term she'd considered before in relation to marriage or courtship. In Boston, marriages among her social circle were alliances, arrangements, convenient mergers of wealth or status. The idea of a genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals was novel and compelling. That evening, as Rose closed her shop, she noticed Ryker's horse tied outside the general store across the street. Acting on impulse, she crossed to wait for him, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. When he emerged carrying supplies, his expression of surprise quickly shifted to pleasure at seeing her. "Rose, didn't expect to see you this evening. I was wondering if you might walk with me," she said, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. "I'd like to speak with you about something." Concern flickered across his features, but he nodded. "Of course. Let me secure these items first." Once his purchases were stowed in his saddlebags, they walked together toward the edge of town where a small park had been established along the creek. The setting sun cast long shadows and painted the western sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. "Is something wrong?" Ryker asked when they'd reached a bench somewhat removed from potential observers. Rose shook her head. "Not wrong exactly. I've just been thinking about us. About what's developing between us." Ryker's expression remained carefully neutral. "I see. I came to Sweetwater to establish independence," she continued, gathering her thoughts as she spoke. "To create something that belonged entirely to me, without interference or oversight from family or society." "I know," he said quietly. "It's one of the things I admire about you." Rose looked at him directly. "What are your intentions toward me, Ryker?" "I need to know before this, whatever this is, progresses further." He seemed unsurprised by the directness of her question. After a moment's consideration, he answered with equal frankness. My intention is to court you properly, Rose. To see if what I feel for you, what I believe you might feel for me, could develop into something lasting. He held her gaze steadily. Eventually, if things continue as they have been, my intention would be to ask you to marry me. The simple honesty of his statement both moved and alarmed her. And what would that mean for my shop? For the business I've worked so hard to establish? Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're worried I'd expect you to give it up, wouldn't you? She challenged. Most men would consider it improper for their wives to maintain independent business interests. To her surprise, Ryker laughed softly. Rose, I've spent most of my life defying what most men consider proper. Why would I start conforming now? His expression sobered. Your skill with a needle and thread is as much a part of you as my way with horses is part of me. I wouldn't ask you to abandon it any more than I'd expect you to ask me to stop ranching. Relief washed through her, followed by a deeper warmth. So you envision what a partnership. Exactly that, he confirmed, reaching for her hand. Two independent people choosing to build something together without sacrificing what makes them who they are. Rose felt a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged begin to dissolve. That's not the conventional approach to marriage. No, he agreed, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. But then neither of us seems particularly conventional, do we? I suppose not, she admitted with a small smile. I'm not asking for an answer now, Ryker clarified. Just permission to continue calling on you with the understanding that my intentions are honorable. And my expectations are not that you'll transform into someone other than who you are. Rose studied his face in the fading light, the strong lines softened by genuine affection, the clear blue eyes that met hers without artifice or hidden agenda. In that moment, she recognized that what she felt for him had grown beyond mere attraction or companionship into something deeper and more significant. I'd like that, she said finally, to continue, exploring what might be possible between us. His smile, then, was worth every moment of uncertainty she'd experienced. Without warning, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips, brief but unmistakable in its intent. I should walk you back, he said when he drew away, though his eyes suggested he was reluctant to end their time together. Yes, Rose agreed, equally reluctant but mindful of propriety. People will talk. Let them, Ryker said with a shrug as they rose from the bench. Gives them something to do during the long summer evenings. As summer progressed into autumn, Rose and Ryker's courtship became increasingly public. They attended church together, shared meals at the hotel dining room, and were seen riding companionably around the outskirts of town. Ryker even accompanied Rose to Alina Collins' wedding, enduring the formal attire and social niceties with remarkable patience. Rose's business continued to thrive, with orders now coming from as far as Denver for her increasingly renowned work. She hired an assistant, a young widow named Clara with a steady hand and quick mind, allowing Rose to focus on the more complex designs while still maintaining the quality that had built her reputation. Ryker, meanwhile, expanded his cattle operation, purchasing an adjacent property when its elderly owner decided to return east to live with his daughter. The additional land meant more work, but also greater security for the future he was increasingly planning with Rose in mind. Their courtship was not without challenges. Rose's independence occasionally clashed with Ryker's protective instincts, particularly when she insisted on traveling alone to Denver to select specialty fabrics. Their disagreement on this point led to their first serious argument, with Ryker concerned for her safety on dangerous roads, and Rose defensive of her ability to manage her own affairs. I traveled halfway across the country alone to get here, she reminded him heatedly one evening as they stood on her back porch after closing the shop. I'm hardly helpless. It's not about helplessness, he countered, frustration evident in his stance. It's about unnecessary risk. The Denver road has seen 3 stagecoach robberies this month alone. So I should surrender my business needs to fear? No, he said, moderating his tone with visible effort. You should consider accepting my offer to accompany you, not because you need protection, but because I care about you and would worry less if I were there. His framing of the issue gave Rose pause. You're not attempting to control my movements. I'm attempting to be part of your life, he clarified, which sometimes means offering support even when you're capable of managing without it. This perspective, so different from the controlling behavior she'd experienced with Charles, made Rose reconsider her position. After further discussion, they reached a compromise. She would make the trip as planned but accept Ryker's company, with the understanding that she would conduct her business dealings independently while he attended to his own errands in Denver. The journey proved illuminating for both of them. Rose observed Ryker's interactions with various acquaintances along the route, noting how he commanded respect without demanding it and treated everyone from hotel clerks to bank presidents with the same direct courtesy. For his part, Ryker watched with undisguised admiration as Rose navigated negotiations with fabric suppliers and potential business partners, her confidence and acumen evident in every transaction. By the time they returned to Sweetwater, their understanding of each other had deepened considerably. The following Sunday, as they walked back from church under a canopy of autumn leaves, Ryker suggested they take the longer route past the creek. There's something I'd like to show you, he said, a hint of nervousness unusual in his typically confident demeanor. Rose agreed, curious about what might prompt such a reaction. They followed the creek beyond the edge of town to where it widened into a small pond surrounded by cottonwoods now blazing with fall color. To Rose's surprise, a blanket had been spread beneath the largest tree with a basket waiting nearby. You planned this, she observed, delighted by the unexpected gesture. Had some help, Ryker admitted. Violet arranged the food. Hope you don't mind cold chicken and apple tarts. It sounds perfect, Rose assured him, accepting his assistance to settle on the blanket. As they shared the simple meal, conversation flowed easily between them, touching on town news, her latest designs, his plans for winter grazing. It wasn't until they'd finished eating that Ryker's earlier nervousness seemed to return, his fingers drumming briefly against his thigh before he reached into his vest pocket. Rose, he began, his voice lower than usual. These past months have been the happiest I can remember. You've brought something to my life I didn't know was missing until I met you. Rose felt her heartbeat quicken as she realized the significance of the moment. You've done the same for me, she said softly. He produced a small wooden box, hand-carved with delicate floral patterns. I made this, he said, offering it to her. Not as fine as your work, but the best I could manage. Rose accepted the box with trembling fingers, opening it to reveal a ring unlike any she'd seen before, a band of gold supporting not a traditional diamond, but a small perfect pearl flanked by tiny blue stones that matched her eyes. It's beautiful, she whispered, genuinely moved by both the gift and the thought behind it. Did you design this as well? Ryker nodded. Had it made in Denver while you were selecting your fabrics. Thought a diamond seemed too common for someone as unique as you. He took her hand gently. Rose Vandermeer, I'm asking if you'd consider becoming my wife. Not to change who you are or what you do, but to join your life with mine as equal partners in whatever future we might build together. Tears pricked at Rose's eyes, not the distressed tears she'd shed when contemplating marriage to Charles, but tears of recognition that this man, this moment, represented everything she'd never dared hope for. Yes, she said simply, her voice steady despite her emotion. Yes, I would be honored to be your wife, Ryker Thompson. His smile then was radiant, transforming his habitually serious features. He took the ring from its box and slipped it onto her finger, the fit as perfect as the sentiment behind it. I love you, he said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue but no less sincere for that. Have for some time now. And I love you, Rose replied, the admission easier than she'd expected. Though I tried quite hard not to at first, Ryker laughed, pulling her gently into his arms. Stubborn woman. You wouldn't want me otherwise, she pointed out, settling against his chest. No, he agreed, tipping her face up for a kiss that sealed their commitment. I wouldn't. News of their engagement spread rapidly through Sweetwater, met with general approval and only a few disappointed sighs from ladies who had harbored their own hopes regarding the town's most eligible rancher. Violet, of course, was triumphant, immediately appointing herself unofficial wedding planner despite Rose's protestations that they intended a simple ceremony. Simple doesn't mean hasty or ill-considered, Violet insisted. And simple certainly doesn't mean you shouldn't have a proper wedding dress. What would people think of a seamstress who didn't create something special for her own wedding? The logic was irrefutable, and Rose found herself devoting evening hours to crafting a gown that would reflect both her professional skills and the significance of the occasion. She chose an ivory silk with subtle embroidery rather than elaborate lace, designing a style that was elegant without being ostentatious. Ryker, meanwhile, set about adapting the ranch house to accommodate a wife. With input from Rose, he expanded the kitchen, added a sewing room with excellent natural light, and improved the garden that Mary had begun. They agreed that Rose would maintain her shop in town, at least initially, traveling between the ranch and Sweetwater as business required. Their wedding was set for the first Saturday in December, allowing time for preparations, but occurring before winter weather might make travel difficult for guests coming from neighboring settlements. Rose invited her parents with minimal expectation that they would attend, given their disapproval of her Western adventure. To her surprise, her mother responded with a cautiously supportive letter and a promise to consider the journey if weather and her father's health permitted. As the wedding day approached, Sweetwater experienced an unseasonable cold snap, with light snow dusting the surrounding hills. Rose watched the weather anxiously, concerned not for herself but for guests traveling from outlying ranches and farms. The evening before the ceremony, as she finished packing the personal items she would take to the ranch the following day, a knock at her door revealed Ryker, his hat dusted with fresh snowflakes. "You shouldn't be here," she chided, though pleased to see him. "It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride before the wedding." "Couldn't wait," he said, stomping snow from his boots before entering at her gesture. "Needed to be sure you hadn't reconsidered." Rose's expression softened as she recognized the genuine concern beneath his casual tone. "Having second thoughts yourself?" "Not for a moment," he assured her, removing his hat and coat. "But you're the one making the bigger adjustment. Town to ranch, independence to marriage, it's a lot to ask of anyone." Rose moved to stand before him, taking his cold hands in her warm ones. "I'm not giving up independence," she reminded him gently. "I'm choosing partnership with someone who respects who I am. There's a world of difference." His relief was visible. "Still, it's a change. Change can bring unexpected good things," she said, echoing his words from months earlier. "You taught me that," he smiled, drawing her closer. "Smart woman, remembering my wisdom and using it against me. Strategic," she corrected with a laugh. "A quality you claim to admire." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, enjoying this brief respite before the public ceremony would bind their lives officially. "I should go," Ryker said eventually, though he made no move to release her. "Before the town gossips spot my horse and decide we've eloped." Would that be so terrible? Rose wondered aloud. To simply ride away together and begin our life without fuss or ceremony? No, he admitted. But you deserve the celebration, and I confess I'm looking forward to seeing you in whatever creation you've been working on so secretly. Then you should definitely leave, Rose said, giving him a gentle push toward the door, and get some rest. Tomorrow will be eventful. He reclaimed his hat and coat but paused with his hand on the doorknob. One thing before I go. A wedding gift arrived today from Boston, from your parents. Rose's eyes widened in surprise. They sent something? A silver tea service, Ryker confirmed, with a note saying they hoped to visit in the spring to meet the man who accomplished what they could not, convincing their headstrong daughter to consider marriage a partnership rather than a prison. Emotion welled in Rose's throat. "They actually wrote that, your mother did," he clarified. "Your father added a postscript saying I should be prepared for a formidable opponent in chess as he taught you himself." Rose laughed through sudden tears. "He did indeed. And he'll be terribly disappointed to learn you don't play." "Who says I don't?" Ryker raised an eyebrow. "Man has to have some secrets to maintain interest." With that intriguing statement and a quick kiss, he departed, leaving Rose to contemplate how much of her past and future had unexpectedly reconciled in ways she could never have anticipated when she first stepped off that stagecoach. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the early morning sun glinting off fresh snow that transformed Sweetwater into a picturesque scene worthy of a Christmas card. Rose awoke early, too excited to sleep despite having worked late into the night on final preparations. Violet arrived shortly after breakfast, accompanied by Clara and several other women who had become friends during Rose's time in town. They helped with her preparations, arranging her hair and assisting with the intricate fastenings of her gown. "You look absolutely radiant," Violet declared when Rose stood fully dressed before the mirror. "Ryker won't know what hit him." The gown was indeed a triumph of Rose's skill, elegant ivory silk that skimmed her figure before flaring gently from the hips, with subtle embroidery at the bodice and hem depicting wildflowers native to the region. Her veil was similarly adorned, attached to a crown of fresh evergreen sprigs and dried berries that Mary had arranged that morning. The ceremony was scheduled for noon at the church, which had been decorated with pine boughs, red ribbons, and candles against the early winter darkness. As Rose waited in the small antechamber, listening to the murmur of arriving guests and the soft music from the organ, she experienced not the panic she had once felt at the prospect of marriage, but a deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Sheriff Davis, who had agreed to escort her down the aisle in her father's absence, appeared at the appointed time, his usually gruff demeanor softened by evident emotion. "Ready, Miss Vandermeer?" he asked, offering his arm. "Though I reckon this is the last time I'll call you that." "I'm ready," Rose confirmed, taking his arm with a steady hand. "More than ready." The church doors opened to reveal an assembly of nearly everyone in Sweetwater and many from surrounding areas. Rose recognized ranchers who had never set foot in her shop, wives who had become customers and then friends, children she had fitted for their first special occasion clothes. All stood as she entered, faces turned toward her with genuine warmth. And there at the altar waited Ryker, more formally dressed than she had ever seen him, but unmistakably himself, tall, steady, his eyes finding hers immediately and not wavering as she moved toward him. The expression on his face, a mixture of pride, wonder, and profound love, was something Rose knew she would remember all her days. Pastor Williams conducted the service with uncharacteristic brevity, perhaps sensing the intensity of feeling between the couple before him required little elaboration or instruction. When Ryker spoke his vows, his voice carried clearly through the church, the sincerity of his promise evident in every word. Rose's response was equally clear, her commitment absolute. The exchange of rings, her pearl, and his simple gold band was followed by the traditional pronouncement, and a kiss that managed to be both respectful of their surroundings and indicative of deeper feelings that would find expression later, in private. The celebration afterward at the hotel dining room was joyous and relaxed, with food contributed by many community members, music from local musicians, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Rose and Ryker moved through the festivities together, accepting congratulations and participating in traditions while maintaining a connection that seemed almost tangible, hands seeking each other, glances exchanged across the room, smiles shared at private jokes. As dusk deepened into night and stars appeared in the clear winter sky, they finally took their leave amid good-natured teasing and genuine well-wishes. Ryker had prepared his best carriage for the journey to the ranch, lining it with heated bricks wrapped in flannel and thick buffalo robes to ward off the cold. As they drove away from town, Rose nestled against her husband's side, content in a way she had never imagined possible when she'd first arrived in Sweetwater. "Happy?" Ryker asked, his arm secure around her shoulders. "Completely," she assured him, tilting her face up for a kiss that he gladly provided. "Though I confess I'm looking forward to being alone with you at last." His low chuckle warmed her further. "That makes two of us, Mrs. Thompson." The name sounded right to her ears, not a replacement for her identity, but an expansion of it, another thread in the tapestry of who she was becoming. She had chosen this man, this life, with open eyes and full heart. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as partners in the truest sense. As the lights of Sweetwater faded behind them and the ranch appeared on the horizon, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought her here, not just the physical distance from Boston to Texas, but the emotional distance from fear to trust, from independence as isolation to independence within connection. When they reached the ranch, Ryker insisted on carrying her across the threshold despite her laughing protests that the tradition was unnecessary. Inside, the house glowed with warmth from banked fires and lanterns left burning by thoughtful hands. Fresh, evergreen boughs decorated the mantel, their scent mingling with cinnamon and cloves. "Welcome home," Ryker said simply as he set her on her feet in the parlor that now bore touches of both their tastes, his books alongside fabrics she had selected, her sketches framed on walls where once only practical maps had hung. "Home," Rose repeated, the word carrying layers of meaning neither of them needed to articulate. "I like the sound of that." Later that night, as snow began falling again outside their bedroom window, they lay entwined beneath quilts in the massive bed that had been Ryker's wedding gift to them, both hand-carved from local oak, with their initials worked into the headboard. The intimacy they shared was tender and passionate, a culmination of the connection that had been building between them for months and a beginning of the deeper understanding that would develop over years. "You remember the day we met?" Rose asked drowsily as they drifted toward sleep. "When those cowboys tore my dress at the celebration, Ryker murmured against her hair. "Remember thinking you looked ready to take on all three of them yourself, torn dress or not?" She smiled against his chest. "I might have tried if you hadn't appeared with your coat." "Glad I could be of service," he said, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Though I had no idea where that simple gesture would lead. No regrets?" she asked, raising her head to look at him in the soft glow from the banked fire. His expression in that moment open, vulnerable in a way he showed to no one else was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. "Not a single one. You. Only that I wasted time resisting what was happening between us," she admitted. "We might have been here sooner." "We're here now," he pointed out pragmatically, "and we have all the time in the world ahead of us." Rose settled back against him, content in that certainty. "Yes," she agreed, "we do." Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white that would transform with sunrise into sparkling possibility, much like the life that stretched before them, waiting to be shaped by their combined strength, individual talents, and shared love. From unlikely beginnings had grown a partnership neither could have imagined, but both now recognized as essential to their happiness. They slept finally, secure in each other and in the home they had created, not just the physical structure that sheltered them, but the deeper sanctuary of absolute acceptance and enduring commitment. The journey that had begun with a torn dress and an offered coat had led them here, to this moment of perfect understanding and the promise of countless moments yet to come. The story of the dress shop owner and the rancher became part of Sweetwater's lore, retold at gatherings and celebrations long after the original participants had passed into memory. But the legacy they created of respect that transcended convention, of partnership that enhanced rather than diminished individual strength, of love that found expression in both grand gestures and daily kindnesses, continued to influence generations who never knew them personally but benefited from the example they had set. And it had all begun with a torn dress, an act of simple kindness, and the courage to recognize in each other not just the appeal of the moment but the promise of a lifetime.